Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. It's been a little while since we've done a video, but Opus 6 is just right around the corner, so let's check out the newest cards that we'll be playing with in the near future. Today's video, we'll be talking about the Opus 6 Fire cards. So to get us started off, we've got Ward. It's a 4 CP forward at 8000 power, so it's on curve. Its job class is Warrior, and this is relevant in that its ability is job Warrior forwards you control other than Ward gain plus 2000 power. So this is the first card that we've seen that's sort of pushing towards a Warrior job class archetype. At this stage, we still don't have too much support for the Warrior class. It does seem like pretty much Ward and Hugh Yerg are the only cards from the game that currently are pushing towards Warriors. So we are seeing some sort of synergy, some sort of archetype being built. So that's really cool to see. But I think at this stage, this card is really kind of sitting where Warrior, the standard unit Warrior Light was in set 1, or where Knights were in set 1. So we've got a couple of cards that are now currently opening up this archetype. We still don't have enough cards of this job archetype yet, and we don't have quite enough support. But actually, what we have right now is not a bad start. So here we have Ward. It does give all your warriors plus 2000 power. Do note it does say job warrior, so all your standard unit warriors do not count, which kind of sucks. I kind of wish that, yeah, it did give both your warriors, your job warriors, as well as your cards named warrior plus 2000 power. That would have really sort of pushed open this archetype a little bit more. But right now, breaking it down, there are a couple of bits of support that you can sort of play with this card. So first of all, Hugh Yerg is a 5-cost card from this set that does allow you to search for a job class warrior from your deck and put it into your hand. And also, yeah, he gains plus 1 additional power and brave if you have Leo. So yeah, so this is kind of like the beginning of a warrior archetype deck being able to be played. In addition to this, there's another card in this set, Kyros, who also happens to be a warrior. Now, Kyros itself isn't particularly strong, but also Kyros has the ability to give a Final Fantasy VIII forward plus 2000 power, first strike, haste, and brave. So there is a very nice synergy with Ward, Kyros, and Hugh Yerg. Definitely that's not enough to sort of build up an entire deck, but I am looking forward in the near future when more sets are being released and potentially what other sort of decks we can build around this warrior archetype. Next, we have the first Fire Legend of the set. We have Garland. It is a 5-cost forward at 9000 power, so it's on curve. If you control a job princess, job knight forwards, you control gain brave. So this ability is pretty solid by itself. In addition to this, he has 2 S abilities. So he's got Blaze. So for S Fire, choose one forward, deal at 7000 damage. So that's pretty good. It allows you to effectively cast a 3-cost CP sort of summon. And its secondary S ability is for 2 fire and 1. Choose one forward, break it, deal 5000 damage to all forwards and opponent control. So this is a very strong like removal ability. So Garland's base body and size and his ability isn't super impressive in the sense that his ability to give all your knights brave isn't like a super game breaking ability, but having Garland on the field does give you access to 2 very strong S abilities that are very well costed, and Garland is one of those cards that we do have quite a couple of copies of. So Garland, I believe this is the 4th copy of Garland that we have, so you really aren't short of copies of this card if you do want to build a Garland type deck. So this card, yeah, sort of does sit itself into a knight type archetype. So Garland is the only knight in fire, I believe. There's quite a couple of knights in water, there's a couple of knights in earth and lightning as well. So potentially we might be able to see like a 3 or 4 color knight archetype deck being built, with Garland being able to give all you guys brave. So yeah, so this card does seem like it's got a spot that it can fill in a lot of different decks right now. Even if it's not in a specifically knight type deck, there are more than a couple of different princesses that you can use to trigger off Garland. So first of all, the most common one, or the first one that comes to mind, is Ophelia. So obviously she's a water backup, which sits well with, because a lot of the knights are also in water, and she gives all your knight forwards plus 1000 power. So of course that gives Garland a buff as well. So this does fit very well into knight synergy. But even without Ophelia, there are quite a number of water forwards that happen to be princesses as well. So actually, I checked this out, and the three big water forwards of Lena, Garnet, and Ash are all princesses. So they will all allow Garland to give all your knight forwards, including himself, brave. So it does allow your Garland to be a 5 CP 9k brave, and you do have access to his S abilities, which were quite strong and actually fulfill a pretty good missing support that water does have, and that water doesn't have particularly good removal. It does have ability to bounce cards, but it doesn't have abilities to remove them. So even if you were to play a primarily fire water deck, even if you don't disregard the sort of night synergy to this, having like 4 or 5 copies of Garland, allowing you to use its S ability and having additional Garlands to use its S ability, as well as having just like water support or water forwards in general, does synergize with this quite well. So Garland does fit into a lot of good spots in a lot of different decks. So this card I'm actually thinking is a bit of a sleeper card, and I think it's going to be reasonably strong. And we might see it see some like sort of mid-tier, tier 1.5 sort of play in the future. Next we have Guy. Now Guy is a free cost forward at 7,000 power, so it's on curve, but this card has a lot of abilities that really sort of back it up. And I've said this before, anytime where a card has 3 distinct abilities and is on curve, it's going to be overpowered. So here we have Guy. He's got Brave, which is fantastic. For each category 2 character other than Guy you control, Guy gets plus 1,000 power. And when Guy is put from the field into a break zone, activate all forwards you control. Now, there's a couple of caveats to this ability. So first of all, his second ability of him getting plus 1,000 power for each category 2 character other than Guy you control, there are not that many category 2 characters in the game right now, and a lot of them are quite split up amongst all different colors. So Guy's in a very similar position of Locke from Opus 4, in that so Locke is a card that required you to have additional Final Fantasy VI characters on the field, but there was only one one FF6 backup that he could really have access to other than Kefka. So you really only had Kefka and Sid for your FF6 backups in order to help try to use Locke's ability. And Guy's kind of the same way. There are not that many FF2 backups that you can use to trigger off Guy's ability. That being said though, one of the most powerful, actually 2 of the most powerful backups in the game, especially early on, are FF2 characters, and that's Mimu and Maria. So having a Maria on the field with Guy does make Guy, just by itself, a free cost 9,000 power forward. So that's actually surprisingly well above curve, and he also has Brave, which is fantastic as well. In addition to this, he also has just like a random third ability of whenever he's put from the field into break zone, activate all forwards you control. So it's kind of like a reverse Renoa effect. So this card is in a lot of ways very similar to Renoa, but in a sort of like a opposite way. And that, so when he does die, you do reactivate all your forwards. So that's a cool little bonus if he does ever like chump block, or if he does ever trade. It does allow you to reactivate your guys, both offense or defense. So there are some good synergies with this card. So this card is actually very, very strong. He's definitely one of those cards I first looked at for the set, and like it's going to be one of those cards I really want to try to build a deck around. There is a reasonable amount of Final Fantasy 2 characters from the set. And yeah, just like chucking him into a like Druid color deck of like Fire Wind with like Gaia Maria support is really good, or potentially something like Fire Water with him and Mimu is potentially quite good as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to be like experimenting with this card and finding out ways that we can really sort of like break this card and make it extremely strong. Next we have Kyros. Kyros is a 2 CP forward at 5,000 power, so it's on curve. When Kyros enters the field, choose one forward you control other than Kyros. It gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So not bad by itself. But if it is a category 8 forward, it also gains haste, first strike, and brave until the end of turn. So this is unbelievably good value. So we have never had, like, I don't feel we've ever had any 2 CP forward that just brings so much value. Even though it is a little bit niche, but then again, we do have quite a lot of Final Fantasy 8 forwards in the game. So in Fire, we do have Kyros and Ward. In Ice, we have the big 3 of Squall, Laguna, and Renoa. And also in Lightning, we also have Seifer and Adia as well. So this card does allow for some really cool like Druid color decks that are like FF8 themed. And yeah, he just gives you so much value. Giving a character plus 2,000 power, haste, first strike, and brave is just like Belias the Gigas plus, right? And he also gives you just like this 2 CP 5k body as well. Now, obviously, like, he's just so much value in that if you already got, like, say, a 7,000 power, like, FF8 character on the field, like a Squall, Laguna, or Renoa, chucking him onto the field basically allows them just attacking for free, because they've got plus 2,000 power, which boosts it from 7 to 9, or 8 to 10, and yeah, it gives them haste, so if they're fresh, they can, like, attack that turn, but also gives them brave, so you're not, like, putting yourself in a situation where you're unable to defend even if you're attacking with your forward. So Kyros is an unbelievably good like sort of follow-up play after you put down a big forward onto the field. So this card is extremely strong, and there are some great combos with this. So potentially, if you do play this with the 4-cost Fire Phoenix, which is a 4-cost summon that allows you to play a 2-cost forward from your break zone back onto the field, you can play Kyros. He then buffs up one of your FFA guys, and you're pretty much going to win any sort of fight that forward's in, because your opponent's forwards have received 2,000 damage from Phoenix. Your guy gets plus 2,000 power, and it gets first strike as well. So this card by itself, not a powerful forward, but it just brings so much value. So if you do build it into a deck that can sort of take advantage of this synergy, this card is going to be really, really good. Next, we have Illusionist. It is a 2 CP backup that has Dull. Put Illusionist into break zone. Choose one forward. It must attack this turn if possible. So this card is an interesting card. It's the first time we've seen a backup with this sort of ability. Now Fire does have this interesting archetype of it like trying to force combat, whether it forces your opponent to block or forces your opponent to attack. I'm not particularly sure about this card. Definitely there are ways for your opponent to get around it. So first of all, this card, if your opponent's forward is unable to attack that turn, because they don't have haste or whatnot, this card is just like completely irrelevant. In addition to that, if a forward has any sort of dull type abilities, they can always just use their dull ability to dull themselves, so they don't have to attack that turn. And it feels like really this card is like it's very, very niche in its ability. So yes, it can create situations where your opponent's forced to attack and can sort of like break up stalemates. But it doesn't feel like there are too many cards in the game right now that can really sort of take advantage of forcing your opponent's forward to attack and then like you winning a fight. So examples do include cards like Machina, where if it destroys one of your opponent's forwards, you get to deal 4,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards, or something like Dataluma, where if it receives damage, then it also gets to deal 4,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards. So this card does have its niche uses, but I feel that it's potentially too niche, and there's not enough forwards that can really sort of take advantage of this card's ability. That being said, it is pretty cheap, so it is a 2 CP backup. But as we are getting more and more cards in this game, and there's no rotation, no ban list, nothing of like that, it becomes increasingly more difficult to put 2 CP backups in, because you already have so many choices. And so Illusionist, unless you're making a very specific niche fun deck, which is definitely one of the great things about this game, that there's so many great sort of niche fun archetype decks that you can build. Outside of those sort of more casual formats and more casual situations, this card probably won't really see any competitive play. So next we got Evoker. It's a 1-cost backup. Not much to say about this card. It's a reprint from the Evoker from set 1. You either love it or hate it. I do know that when I went to Japan to play, the Japanese player really loved Evokers. They just give you an extra 1 CP they give you an extra 1 backup in future for just 1 CP, so you're not investing cards, and it does help you ramp up very, very quickly. They do tend to be more stronger in sort of mono-colored decks, simply because you do need to have a backup of that existing color to be able to put it in for its 1 CP cost. But yeah, like if I'm playing monocolored decks, I do sort of want to have at least like 1 or 2 Evokers in the deck, just to help the deck sort of ramp up and speed up, unless I have any sort of specific strategies that sort of deviate from that otherwise. Next, we have Cornelia. It's a 2 CP backup. When Cornelia enters the field, all forwards you control gain plus 1,000 power until the end of the turn. And it's got an interesting secondary ability of Fire Dull, return Cornelia to its owner's hand. So this is like a pretty interesting ability. It's one of the few backups we've seen in the game that have an ability where it can sort of return something back to its owner's hand. So this is a backup that can recur itself. And that when you play it, you can give all you guys plus 1,000 buff, and then just like in future, if you want to sort of pick up that buff again, you can always return it back to your hand and play it down. So if we look at it from like a purely like mathematical point of view of just like how efficient this card is, you're paying 2 CP for a backup, and you're just getting an immediate effect straight away. So that's not too bad, right? But then in future, you can also like pay effectively 2 CP, which is like the Fire and Dull, in order to put this back to your hand in order to play it down again. So you're kind of you kind of reserve the ability in future to spend 4 CP to give your forwards plus 1,000 power for the turn. So that is a little bit expensive in that like you're spending 4 CP to give all you guys plus 1,000 power. It feels like in my mind you need like at least 3 or 4 forwards to really sort of justify that cost, or in like really tight situations where you need to sort of break a stalemate. But like other than that, Fire already has a lot of ways in which it can pump its forwards up. And so yeah, so Cornelia isn't very cost efficient for what it does. Now, the interesting thing about this card that I really sort of like want to sort of explore are cards that have that sort of benefit you or give you bonuses for playing backups. So, for example, 4-cost Balthier from Opus 2, which activates every time you put one of your backups into play. His one of his weaknesses is that, like, after you do reach 5 backups, it's very difficult to trigger its ability anymore. Now, Cornelia does give you an interesting option of, like, you can use Cornelia's ability, and then you can attack with Balthier or use Balthier's ability. You can put Cornelia back to your hand, put it down, and then you can reactivate Balthier. And that's just like a simpler example of like cards that do synergize with the fact that you can recur a backup. So yeah, so I'm personally more interested about what we can do with a backup that can go back to your hand as opposed to just spending 4 CP to give all you guys plus 1000 power. But potentially in the future, we might see some interesting combo decks that can sort of make use of this. And I'm always keeping my eye out for interesting things we can do with it. Next, we have Goblin. It's a 2 CP monster. Its ability is for 0 until the end of the turn. Goblin also becomes a forward of 5000 power, and when Goblin attacks, you choose one forward, deal 1000 damage. You can only use this ability once per turn. So this card is not a very impressive card. Its only strength that it's got on it is that the fact that it's a monster that can transform. So it means that it is kind of protected on your opponent's turns, and that it's not a forward during your opponent's turn when you don't want it to be. So that's its only strength. Other than that, this Goblin doesn't really do that much. It's effectively just a 5000 power forward that can deal 1000 damage when it attacks. And 1000 damage isn't particularly hard to do, especially in colors such as fire, lightning, or wind. And 1000 damage is quite minimal. And yeah, having 5000 power body doesn't really sort of help justify it, even at its cost. But yeah, admittedly, yeah, if you do have some sort of board wiping type ability, having monsters available that can transform to attack afterwards is pretty good. But unless you're playing a deck that has board wiping type abilities, such as Shantotto or such as Cloud of Darkness, I really don't think there's a need to play a card like this. So yeah, it's going to be really difficult to sort of like find a use for this card. Its body is not particularly strong, and it only deals 1000 damage, which isn't particularly relevant in this game. And it doesn't have any sort of like niche type abilities that fire sort of really need, or sort of really build into fire archetype. And because of that, yeah, I don't really think this card will see much play. Next, we have Sid 11. It's a 4 CP backup. When Sid 11 enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 card among them to your hand and put the rest into the break zone, or all forwards you control gain plus 3000 power until the end of turn. Now, this card is actually pretty interesting. So, it's got 2 abilities. So first of all, its first ability of like allowing you to select one top 3 cards and put it into your hand. This sort of cycling is an effect that Fire doesn't really have. So Fire doesn't really have that many ways to sort of like cycle through their deck or search or look up stuff. So having ability that's like very generic like this is actually pretty welcome for like more combo orientated Fire decks. So yeah, so at worst, it's kind of just a 2 CP backup that does help you cycle a little bit. So that, like by itself, it's not too bad, right? But it also has the like secondary ability of like later on in the game, if you do draw this card, you can use it to give all you guys plus 3000 power, which can help you break stalemates in boards. Yeah, there's definitely been times in the past where I've had a board of like 2 or 3 forwards, and I would play a Gipple to give all of them plus 4000 power, and I was able to make a big play that turn. And Sid 11 does allow you to have similar sort of options like that as well. Yeah, the fact that he's Sid 11 doesn't lock you up from playing other Sids, which is fantastic. And there are some other little synergies as well. So we have Volker that does have benefits when you do play Final Fantasy 11, and we have like other cards such as Star Sibyl that allow you to search for Final Fantasy 11 characters as well. So having that Final Fantasy 11 tag also has little benefits to it as well. I'm not sure if I would like put this into my Fire decks, but potentially like having 1 copy, I think, try that out. Definitely, it's not a bad card. But yeah, having a look at potentially how much it's needed in decks is really sort of what will determine whether this sees play or not. But Fire does seem to like want to swarm out forwards at around like the 2 CP, 3 CP forward mark. So yeah, so potentially Fire does swarm out pretty well. So having a Sid 11 give like say 2 or 3 forwards that are 2 or 3 CP, giving them plus 3000 power, putting them from 5000 to 8000 or 7000 to 10,000 is actually pretty good. And it's flexible in situations when you don't want to do that as well. So this card's actually not bad, but ultimately depends on what sort of niche or direction that the Fire decks want to go towards. And here is a backup that I'm really excited for. It's Vermilion Bird Lassie Tuner. It is a 6 CP backup. If a forward is dealt damage by your fire summon, the damage increases by 1000 instead. In addition to this, when Vermilion Bird Lassie Tuner enters the field, you may search for a fire summon of cost 4 or less and cast it without paying its cost. If you do not cast it, put the summon into a break zone. So, effectively, it is a 2 CP backup that allows you to search your deck and play a 4 CP summon immediately when it comes into play. So already this is actually like pretty solid value in the sense that if you were to like just play a Bahamut from your hand, you would have to have the Bahamut and you would have the 4 CP available in order to do it, right? So Vermilion Bird Lassie basically replaces the Bahamut replaces the Bahamut that you would have had to have in your hand in order to cast it, right? So yeah, so it's great in that it's already just like straight up like solid value. But in addition to this, it makes all your fire summons deal one additional 1000 extra. And a lot of the fire summons just happen to be like on the edge of like how much damage you need them to do, and pushing them that extra 1000 is actually really quite strong. So Bahamut at 8000 is quite solid, but pushing it up to 9000 is actually really good. It actually deals with a lot of like major threats that are around that 9000 power mark. In addition to this, if you're playing something like Phoenix, like the 7-cost Phoenix that normally deals 8000, pushing 8000 to 9000 is really quite good. So like I'm really looking forward to try this card. By itself, it's great in that you can just like use it to search a Bahamut, kill a forward, remove it from the game, and it's dealing an extra 1000 damage as well. But towards the later game, all your summons that are dealing like 7000, 8000, 9000 damage, giving them plus 1000 extra damage to them increases their range of like what they can lethal out very well. And this is a card like I really think that Fire really need to like sort of push it back up towards relevance. Just like more powerful ongoing type backup type abilities that can sort of like benefit the deck to really sort of like help it build an archetype of, yeah, in this case it looks like making their summons more powerful, because fire summons like generally are quite powerful, but yeah, just didn't feel like that they had enough of like a backup or like a synergy archetype to sort of really push them towards that direction. And this card I'm really excited to be pushing like this sort of theme, and I really want to try it out. Next, we have Dominion Legionary. It's a 4 CP backup. When Dominion Legionary enters the field, search your deck for one card named Dominion Legionary and add it to your hand. So another copy of this card. Its ability of Dull, put Dominion Legionary into the break zone. Choose one attacking forward. It gets plus 1000 power until the end of the turn. So its secondary ability isn't particularly strong, but it does seem like this card's main ability is the fact that when you do play this card, you do search for extra copies of themselves. So yeah, it does seem interesting that this card does sort of like allow you to guarantee a ramp structure for your deck, and sort of like prevent you from being sort of backup screwed. In the sense that if you have one copy of this card in your hand, you can play it, grab another copy, you can play it, and then you can grab another copy. So potentially, this card allows you to set up double or triple backups very easily. So yeah, so you can I definitely see potentially in certain decks that are running 3 copies of this. Turn 1, play Dominion Legionary, search for Dominion Legionary, play second one, and then on the next turn, tap those 2 backups, discard a card to play another Dominion Legionary or to play another backup. You generally don't want to play the third Dominion Legionary because you're not able to search for anything. So you're generally just going to play 2, and then like that does allow you to set up at least 2 backups on your first turn. This card does have the weakness though. If you have 2 copies of this card in your hand, its effect is significantly weakened in that when you play it down the first time, you do get to search for another copy, but if you got 2 copies in your hand, you don't want to play anymore because you're paying 4 CP for a card that doesn't search for any more copies of itself. So yeah, so this card, like if there was another backup copy of this, or if there was another 4 copy of this, something that allowed that third Dominion Legionary to do something, rather than just be discarded, then this card would be a little bit more viable. But at this stage, its secondary ability, while it's pretty easy to use, its gimmick of searching for additional copies of itself doesn't seem strong enough. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of benefit to it being standard unit or being type 0. But yeah, if there were potentially ways to sort of make use of more type 0 backups or like more standard unit backups, then potentially this card would have been like more relevant. But without any sort of like reason to sort of play a card of these traits, this card doesn't really sort of have enough to sort of push towards any sort of relevance. Next we have Zell. It is a 4 CP forward at 4000 power, so it's quite below the curve. It's got haste. When Zell enters the field, select one of the two following options. Choose one forward an opponent controls, deal damage equal to Zell's power, or choose a monster of cost 2 or less than opponent controls and break it. So this card is actually quite a flexible, like, sort of like toolbox card, in that, like, at 4 CP, at 4,000 power, it's not particularly strong. It's actually quite weak. But yeah, when it comes in, it's able to deal effectively 4,000 damage minimum, or it's able to break a monster of 2 or less. So if you consider it just as a forward that can break a monster of 2 or less, it's not too terrible. It's not too terrible, right? But when you do combine it with any sort of pumps or any sort of buffs, then this card becomes significantly stronger. So this card, if you can like apply like say 2,000 or 3,000 worth of buffs on him, this card becomes absolutely like absolutely amazing. So if you were to like just have like Labral on the field to give it plus 1,000 power and have any way to like give it plus 1 or plus 2,000 power on top, it can come in. It can be like a 7,000 power forward. You can deal 7,000 power or 7,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards. That will generally kill a free cost forward or less. And then it's able to attack because it's got haste at turn. And then in matchups where you don't need to have such a big like such a big packet of damage to deal to a forward, you can always just use it to break a pesky like 2-cost monster such as a Cactuar or something like that. So this card is really quite flexible. And yeah, like definitely there are some very interesting combos with it, especially something like Kefka, where Kefka can give it like immediate plus 5,000 power immediately, even though it does break it at the end turn. But that combos with Zell quite well, in that if you play Zell, choose to deal damage equal to its power, you Kefka it in response, pumps it up to 9,000, so Zell just immediately deals 9,000 to one of your opponent's forwards, and because he's haste, he's like going to be able to attack him for 9,000 power, and your opponent generally doesn't want to block a forward of that size, or even want to trade with it, because Zell is going to die at the end of turn anyways. So yeah, so like Kefka and Zell I think is going to be like a very fun combo. Now, if there's any sort of ways to sort of like recur this combo more, that'd be really interesting and really fun. And yeah, I'd be like super interested in trying to build a deck where you just like using Earth's abilities to like recur Zell, and just keep sending him in with Kefka, and clear your opponent's board and just like keep attacking through. So yeah, really excited to try this card out for like a more casual type deck. In addition to this, it's also Final Fantasy VIII as well, so you can play Kyros, and there are like the Final Fantasy VIII support as well. So yeah, really interested to try this card out. Next, we have Selfie. It's a free cost backup. It's a seed candidate. It's EX Burst. When Selfie enters the field, you may search your deck for a job seed candidate forward and add it to your hand. So I did a little bit of a search up, and there's not too many seed candidates in the game right now. So like right now, I believe Zell is a seed candidate. You got Squall as a seed candidate, and you got Cypher as a seed candidate. And those are your main seed candidates. Selfie is a seed candidate herself as well. But obviously Selfie can't search for like backup, so she can't search for copies of herself. So yeah, that being said, Squall, the seed candidates for Squall are the two new Squalls. Is the Heroic Squall from this set, and it's also the Heroic Squall from Opus 2. And neither of these Squalls seem particularly amazing. Searching out Cypher is kind of cool. But yeah, in most decks where you're running Cypher, you kind of want to run other things as well. And Cypher's already inherently got a searcher in Fujin. So yeah, so Selfie doesn't really want to be searching for Squall. It doesn't really want to be searching for Cypher, and searching for Zell, maybe not as well. So yeah, so Selfie, it's like there's not a lot of quality targets that Selfie wants to be searching. And that's kind of the big issue. Like, there's not enough seed candidates to sort of really make use of this, and we've seen similar things from previous sets. Cards like Restrictor that can search for Tiviettes, and like those sort of like more niche searcher cards are like definitely fun in those specific sort of like decks that do play those categories, and definitely for like tier 2 type like sort of fun games, and like definitely they're fun cards to try out. But yeah, in a more competitive format, this card doesn't really search for anything that you really need, that you really want in the game. Next, we have Warrior. It's a 5 CP forward at 9,000 power. When Warrior attacks, Warrior gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. Yeah, so like this card is underwhelming. Like, the thing with standard units is that you generally want to be able to spam out a lot of standard units, because there's a lot of support for some standard units, and there's like a lot of buffs and a lot of ways to get them in cheaply. You generally don't want to be playing a high-costed standard unit. So there's no real incentive to play this card. And generally for 5 CP, you can generally get a lot more extra value from your cards. So yeah, so Warrior is, yeah, doesn't fit the standard unit archetype particularly well. And for 5 CP, you can get much better deals, even on like cheap heroic cards if you can't afford legendary cards. So there's really no like point of playing a card like this. Next, we have Soldier. It's a free CP forward at 7,000 power. For 2 CP, Soldier gains plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. So yeah, so this card is just like most standard units, not particularly amazing. In this game, like it's quite easy to like increase and decrease the power of cards, like the battle power of the cards. So paying 2 CP to give plus 1,000 power onto a forward is is kind of like a waste of CP. You would rather just spend that extra 2 CP and just play a 5 CP forward, right? And it's not very cost efficient in that, like, if it was pay 1, then potentially you can like do it multiple times a turn to make use of its ability. But yeah, it's not particularly cost effective. And like it's like otherwise there's not much else to this card in that it doesn't have any sort of keyword type abilities like haste or brave and so on. So otherwise it's just kind of a vanilla card, and so this card doesn't really sort of like fulfill any sort of archetype. Next, we have Dark Lord. It's a free CP forward at 8,000 power. When Dark Lord enters the field, remove the top 10 cards of your deck from the game. At the beginning of your attack phase, choose up to 1 forward, deal it 3,000 damage. So this card is like slightly above curve in that it's effectively a 4 CP forward that can also deal 3,000 damage at the start of your attack phase. So the 3,000 damage is a little bit underwhelming, and like moving up from 7,000 to 8,000 power, while it is relevant, doesn't make it a big enough jump to sort of justify removing the top 10 cards of your deck. Now, like removing the top 10 cards of your deck is definitely worse in certain deck archetypes and certain decks than others, right? So in a water deck, for example, I would never play a card like this, in that water has so many ways to search and draw for cards that removing the top 10 cards of your deck basically automatically loses you the game, because you're already a deck that sort of runs through a lot of its cards very quickly already. But for fire, potentially, or fire, or maybe like a fire lightning type deck, where there's not too many like draw or search type abilities, and your deck is generally going to be quite a bit faster, you're not super worried if you're like 10 cards down. That being said, you will never play a second one in the game, because like, yeah, losing another 10 would probably mean you lose the game. So yeah, so this card, like by itself, it's kind of very hard to justify. Now, if there's any sort of like additional sort of ability on top of him, I might have been able to justify him. Maybe if he had like Brave, or maybe if he had Haste or First Strike or something. But yeah, just being 8,000 body by himself and like 3,000 damage at the start of the attack phase is a little bit underwhelming. So because of that, like, yeah, this card doesn't give you enough to sort of justify the cost you have to put down in order to play this card. Next, we have Bahamut. It is a 4 CP summon that's got EX Burst. Choose 1 forward, deal it 10,000 damage. Bahamut deals you 1 point of damage. EX Burst of cards put into the damage zone due to this damage cannot be used. So this card is like both strong and weak at the same time. So obviously, like 10,000 damage is really quite strong. It pretty much like takes off any forward from the field at all, right? But yeah, like you do suffer 1 point of damage, and you can't EX Burst of that, which kind of sucks. So yeah, so obviously this is a solution to big forwards that Fire doesn't necessarily have the nukes to be able to get over, right? And it does have EX Burst, which means that if you do EX Burst of it, you can just use it to like kill one of your opponent's larger forwards, despite taking extra damage. Now, if you are a more aggressive Fire deck, then definitely like I can there is relevance to this, in that if you're always going to be on head-on damage and you're racing your opponent, you don't mind taking a little bit of damage, right? Because generally, if you're playing very aggressively and you put your opponent up to like 4 or 5 damage very quickly, your opponent is generally going to be playing more defensively to try to sort of stop you, as opposed to attacking you, which does allow you to use your life as a sort of resource to sort of like play or attack more aggressively on. So definitely I can see a deck that would make use of this card. And at 4 CP, it's reasonably costed. It's not like value. If this was a free CP, if it was a free CP summon, then I can definitely see it seeing a lot more wider play. At free CP, dealing 10,000 damage, even at the cost of a life, it's actually pretty good. But in any sort of like extended sort of mid-rangey sort of fire deck, I wouldn't play this, because yeah, you like trading off damage, like trading off damage for that extra little bit of damage that you can deal is actually pretty expensive. And you can't just like use this like haphazardly towards the mid game just to remove like sort of like an 8,000 power forward. When you use this card, you really want to be like trying to hit something that's really difficult or really major or really annoying to deal with, because you are taking 1 point of damage in order to use this card, even if you're hitting something small. And that's the thing. If it was like the option to receive damage in order to deal a little bit extra damage, then definitely this card would be much stronger. But the fact is that every time you cast this, you have to receive a damage. Yeah, no matter like how big or small the target is, or whether you need to go 10,000, really makes you think: do you need a summon that does 10,000 damage? And is it worth justifying like putting 1 damage down? So yeah, so obviously depending on the deck and the speed of the deck that you're playing, you can justify playing this card or not. But I think for most mid-rangey sort of fire decks, I don't think that this is necessarily required. I think there are other better options available to you. Next, we have Neo Bahamut. It is a 2-cost summon. You can only cast Neo Bahamut during your main phase. That being said, you can cast it on the stack. So during your main phase is the only time you can cast it, but you can cast it in response to stuff. So that's an interesting little thing to note. Its ability is choose 1 forward, deal it 8,000 damage, discard all your hand. So yeah, so first of all, quality translation by Square Enix again, discard all your hand. But yeah, at 2 CP, dealing 8,000 damage is actually pretty good. Yeah, it's definitely very good. Its drawback of only being castable during your main phase kind of sucks. In that like you can't just like you can't like dump your entire hand and then like use it as a responsive card on your opponent's turn. So it is kind of annoying in that regard. But yeah, so like this card, like I don't think Fire needs this card. Like I don't think like Mono Fire needs this card, and that Fire now has like reasonable ways to deal packets of 8,000 damage quite reliably. And they're not too like hungry on CP. But I do see potential for this card to be in like a sort of dual color deck, potentially in Fire and Ice, that is more discard heavy. Like if you're playing a more aggressive discard heavy type deck that takes advantage of like parallel discard effects. So cards like Jesper, where you and your opponent both discard a card, you can just play all your stuff down. You can then Neo Bahamut kill your opponent's stuff, make it so you have no cards in hand, and then you can just Jesper their hand, right? So yeah, so Neo Bahamut, like while it's like a little bit inflexible, the payoff is actually not bad. And if you build your deck around having no hand or using these cards that affect both you and your opponent's hand, you can like prevent the downsides of other cards, or you can minimize the downside of this card. So yeah, so this card, like I think will have some very interesting niche play, but in general probably won't see play in like sort of just like mainstream Fire decks. Here we have the second Fire Legendary of the set. We have Furion. It is a 4-cost 8,000 power forward. If you control a job rebel forward, the cost of playing Furion onto the field is reduced by 2. If your opponent controls 3 or more forwards, Furion gains plus 1,000 power and haste. And put 1 back up into a break zone. Until the end of the turn, Furion gains First Strike and Brave. So there's a lot to unpack with this card. So first of all, yeah, it's a 4 CP 8,000 power forward, so it's on curve. But if you do control a rebel, then reduce the cost by 2. Right now there aren't that many rebels in the game, so so far in the game there is like Furion, which obviously you can't play this Furion while you already have Furion on the field. There's Guy, which is like definitely the card that you'll be seeing this card played with the most. You have the Maria forward, you have Leon, both Ice Leon and Wind Leon, and you have Jesper. No, that ice forward, that 4 CP ice forward from set 1. Joseph, I think. Yeah. So there are not too many rebel forwards in the game right now. So it does make it a little bit difficult for you to trigger off its ability to give it -2. But yeah, like making it -2 costs, so going from 4 to 2 is actually very, very quite good. Its secondary ability of when your opponent has 3 or more forwards, giving him plus 1,000 power and haste. That's fantastic as well, but it's a little bit situational and conditional. And its third ability of put 1 back up in the break zone to give him haste and to give him First Strike and Brave is also it's good and bad. So like on one hand, it does allow Fire decks to very easily break their own backup. So if because Fire has a lot of these really good enter play ability Fire backups, such as Vivi, such as Black Waltz, yeah, such as say Tuna. A lot of these backups are quite good when they enter play, but they are unique backups, which means that you want to clear them out if you want to play more copies of them in the future. And this Fearon allows you to be able to do that quite efficiently, quite easily. Yeah, so its third backup is more of its third ability is more of a utility ability, but it does open up a lot of things that Fire can do. Its second ability is a little bit niche in that, yeah, there's not too many situations where your opponent's going to have free forwards on you, and if they do have free forwards on you, you generally don't really want to be attacking, because yeah, if you're attacking your opponent, yeah, you're not able to block a lot of the attacks that your opponent's going to send into you next turn. So yeah, it's quite a niche ability. It won't come up very often. And its first ability of like reducing its cost if you control a job rebel, that's not going to be an effect that you're going to trigger off too often, unless you're playing a rebel deck in particular. And even then, there's not a lot of ways for you to trigger off this ability. You're going to have Fear and you're going to have Guy. And yeah, there's not too many ways of pulling it off. You've got like Maria and you got Leon. And yeah, and so you're not going to have too many other forwards that can help you trigger off this ability, which yeah, makes this card a little bit difficult to play. Definitely in future, if we like, all we need is just maybe like one or two more rebels in a synergistic or in the same element, then Fearon will become significantly much more playable. But at this stage, it just doesn't seem to be enough support, it doesn't seem to be enough support, and the payoff just doesn't seem to be kind of good enough to sort of justify playing this Fearon at this stage. Next, we have Montblanc. It's a 2 CP backup. It's Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced 2, FFTA 2. For Fire Dull, choose one forward, deal it 2,000 damage for each category FFTA 2 forward you control. So this ability is actually quite strong in that like it's just a Fire Dull, and it doesn't break this backup. Usually for backups like this, you'd expect to break it, but the fact that this card doesn't break itself is actually really quite good. Deal 2,000 damage for each FFTA 2 forward. Now the issue is that most of the FFTA 2 forwards are going to be standard units, but most of the good ones are wind or lightning. So Luso, Ilua, these are going to be like, yeah, these are the like main playable FFTA 2 cards, and they're in two separate colors. So definitely Montblanc's power is very has a lot of potential and it's quite strong. But the thing is that you're going to be having to splash in awkward colors between fire, wind, or fire, lightning, or fire, wind, and lightning, tricolor potentially, in order to really sort of make use of this ability. And then even then, if you do have like say 3 FFTA 2 forwards, then you're only dealing 6,000 damage with this, which is actually pretty good for considering that it's only 2 CP on a backup that you don't have to break. So it's cost wise, it's actually pretty good. But yeah, like playing any more forwards onto a field like that, you're kind of like setting yourself up for potentially getting board wiped. But yeah, so this card is actually like pretty powerful. The only issue is that it just happens to be in a color that doesn't really synergize particularly well with all it is. Yeah, obviously you could play it in a more like standard Unity sort of deck, and that'd be quite interesting. So playing yeah, this and just like playing in a more standard unit sort of deck, you can just use it as an additional way to just deal large packets of damage. But yeah, I think that's probably the way that this card's going to sort of more fall towards. If you play like more of a standard unit-ish sort of deck that are those FFTA 2 standard units, those are generally forwards that you can sort of you can Zerg out with, and there is support to help you play a lot more standard units. And yeah, being able to use this to just deal out packets of 8,000 damage is really good. So yeah, definitely this is one of those fun cards to build a deck around. So it's definitely a card that you can sort of like really push an archetype with. But yeah, it's just a little bit cumbersome to play. And next we have Ruby Dragon. So it is a 2 CP backup, and you can also pay Fire 1, put Ruby Dragon into Break Zone, choose on forward, deal it 8,000 damage. So from previous sets we had just Dragon, which was a lightning monster that could break itself to like destroy a forward or a monster of cost 4 or less. And here we have Ruby Dragon, which is effectively the fire equivalent of Dragon, in that you're basically getting the equivalent of Bahamut. The 4 CP Bahamut of dealing 8,000 damage for 4 CP, and in this case you get to break up that payment as well. So yeah, so this card is just solid. It's quite reasonable. The big issue is that like fire doesn't really sort of have any give you any bonuses or any synergies for playing monsters, which kind of sucks. But yeah, like in terms of its like strength, it's actually just like straight up on straight up solid on curve. And yeah, this like definitely having the ability, like reserving ability at any point to just pay fire 1 to do 8,000 damage is quite good. So yeah, so I can definitely see like potentially a lot of decks that would just like want to put a Ruby Dragon in their deck, just so like at some points during the game, if they kind of got their backup set up and they got some forward set up, you can just put a Ruby Dragon down and just set it up. So in future you can have a cheaper like 8,000 packet of like damage removal that you can you can very cheaply put down. So yeah, so this card is solid, but considering how fire does lean more towards supporting its summons right now, yeah, might be a little bit difficult to justify. And that is our video for the Opus 6 Fire cards. I hope you guys enjoyed it. What do you guys think about the cards? Were there any cards that I sort of like overrated or underrated? Are there sort of any interesting combos that you're thinking about working on? Let me know in the comment section below, and I do try to respond to you guys as much as you can. As soon as I get all of these set reviews done, I'll go back to making deck videos, and I promise I'll have some deck videos up for you guys in the future, so you guys can check out and have some interesting decks to try out and build. But until then, yeah, please drop back a little bit later as I release my next video in the Opus 6 set review, which is the ice cards. Until then, I hope you guys have a good one. Grand J out.